One of the biggest misconceptions is that if a semen analysis is normal, quote unquote normal, then the sperm isn't playing a role in the ability to get or stay pregnant. 95% of the study participants had better sperm parameters than what the official guidelines ended up being.
Brooke is a functional medicine dietitian specializing in fertility and reproductive health. Over the past 9 years, she has helped hundreds of couples overcome fertility challenges. She's an expert in her field and is changing the lives of so many families today. And last but not least, Brooke was also an advisor to TIES and was fundamental in the extensive R&D process creating the TIES Foundations product.
Many men that would have been flagged for additional support are actually now considered normal. It's based on getting pregnant. It's not based on staying pregnant or the health of the pregnancy or the lifelong health of that tiny human. I've seen DNA fragmentation go from 90 percentile all the way down to below 30 percentile with nutrition and lifestyle changes, no medications, no, reproductive technology or anything like that.
So we're doing this.
We're podcasting. We're podcasters now. Hi, Brooke. Welcome to the Our Ties podcast. We are so happy to have you here.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to chat all about male fertility.
So before we start, I don't know how you are with hearing your background and compliments, but I want to start with maybe embarrassing you a little bit and giving you and giving the audience just an overview of the amazing work that you've done. Brooke is a functional medicine dietitian specializing in fertility and reproductive health. Over the past 9 years, she has helped hundreds of couples overcome fertility challenges and finally take home healthy babies, even after years of trying without success. Brooke combines evidence-based nutrition with a holistic root cause approach to identify and remove barriers that stand in the way of optimal fertility. She's an expert in her field and is changing the lives of so many families today. And last but not least, Brooke was also an advisor to TIES and was fundamental in the extensive R&D process creating the TIES Foundations product. So Brooke, we are so thrilled and honored to have you on this podcast, to have such important conversations. I think just to kick this off, I would love to hear from you on your background, what got you specifically into the nutrition space, and even more into focusing on fertility.
Yes. So it was very, very much my own personal health story that eventually led me to what I do today. I've been specializing in fertility for just over 9 years now, but before that, my interest in nutrition in itself was very much sparked from my own health journey, which started with a slew of symptoms and not really getting any answers aside from take this pill for this symptom and another pill for another symptom, which was extremely frustrating. So I kept digging and learning. I just wasn't comfortable with taking a pill for every symptom or ailment. I knew there had to be more to the story. So one thing led to another, and I eventually got a couple of diagnoses, including celiac disease and Hashimoto's thyroiditis, which definitely steered me in the nutrition direction in a really big way. Not only personally and changing like nutrition in my own life, but also in school too. I was in college at the time. So naturally I started taking more nutrition classes and eventually got into a master's program to really learn a lot more about the ins and outs of nutrition from a more like biological standpoint and all of that fun stuff. So that led me kind of towards the dietetics track as far as education goes, all the while learning in my own personal life how it's really impacting my own health and eventually connecting the dots between fertility, just how my own personal nutrition changes were changing my cycle health and what was happening with symptoms throughout my cycle. So I started asking more questions questions about the connections between nutrition and fertility, and actually was able to do part of my internship alongside a dietitian who was very much in the women's health space, and definitely opened up my eyes to how big of an impact nutrition has on women's health and fertility. And one thing led to another. I did end up starting my own practice not long after graduating with my master's in nutrition, while continuing to learn a lot more about like the functional perspective and approach to overall health, which nutrition plays a really massive role in too. But once I started working with women and fertility, it took a couple years, but eventually the male was natural to bring into, you know, seeing them as well, because obviously they are providing such a big piece. 50% of that DNA is contributing to the ability to conceive and then the health of that pregnancy as well. So it was kind of a long journey to get here, but definitely worthwhile, just based on all of the like learning and piecing things together kind of shaped how I practice today.
That's amazing, Brooke. Thanks for sharing that. I'd love to drill down just a little bit deeper even into that. Was there kind of a singular moment that made you realize that there's just gaps in the way that we typically think about fertility and couples preparing for pregnancy?
I don't know if I could pinpoint one singular moment. I think it was something I thought about a lot just from seeing the major gaps in the women's health arena. And once I did start, working with both partners, the male and the female, realizing that, there are so many gaps along the way. Just starting with like the female and, all of the cycle problems and what kind of support she's given around that, which is essentially birth control, and until you're ready to conceive. And then on the male side, like there's really nothing that happens. There's try, as far as guidance goes. Certainly no preconception information on either side of the equation, male or female. So yeah, I don't think there's any like one particular moment, but just through the process of my own health journey and definitely working with individuals and couples, it was fairly glaring that there's a lot of gaps.
It's so interesting you share that too, Brooke, around just the women's side, because that was something for me that was honestly one of even the reasons we started even talking about ties was because we first were initially looking into so much on my end. And honestly, nutrition was a huge area I had not focused on in my life. And, I have gone through so many different challenges, honestly, like in my own right, which again is like why we started to prompt these conversations. And there's a lot of period of my life where I didn't have a period. I didn't have a regular cycle. And it was something where I had to take a step back. And I was really shocked by how little information I had grown up knowing. And it really are not educating young women on this side. And I think it's great that these conversations are a bit more common now. I think we're seeing a lot of products come out too and a lot of information around the women's side. I'm curious why, I guess in your perspective, like why you haven't seen that conversation more on the male side. And I mean, obviously not around cycle, but just around fertility and the impact that goes into that.
I think it's starting very, very slowly. But I think honestly, a large part of it is just where the semen analysis parameters sit and how many men are told that, oh, everything's normal, like you're good. Whereas like 50 years ago, they would have been considered infertile and they maybe would have like been sent or more likely would have been sent for additional follow-up and support there. But with those drastically decreasing parameters, and most people are trusting their providers, and so when they hear that it's normal, they stop looking, they stop searching without really realizing the massive impact that they are actually having on not only time to conception, but ability to carry to term and the health, definitely the lifelong health of that baby. Um, so slowly, I think we're hearing more about it, but yeah, I think the knowledge in the like primary care setting is just extremely lacking, and that's a major gap area that needs to be fulfilled.
Yeah. I I think of course we're going to focus the conversation in a lot of ways on the men's side as we're talking about ties. But Brooke, I'm just curious. You spoke to some of them now around the primary care side of things and the misconceptions that are going on there. What are some of those biggest misconceptions that you see from people that are eye-opening when they start to talk about men's fertility in general? Because I know certainly as we were going through this journey with building ties, I felt like every stat we were seeing started to really open our eyes. And so I'd love to just hear a little bit of your perspective on that.
Yeah, I would say one of the biggest misconceptions is that if a semen analysis is normal, quote unquote normal, then the sperm isn't playing a role in the ability to get or stay pregnant. I think that, yeah, that and that male fertility and sperm really only matters for getting pregnant would be kind of a follow up for another really big misconception. That's so untrue. That rapid development that happens so early post conception or post fertilization of the egg involves a whole DNA reprogramming. And so, if 50% of that DNA is not in good shape, there's going to be a lot of problems in continuing to, in that pregnancy, being able to continue to develop.
And are there any typical, I guess, warning signs that men typically ignore as we're looking at this journey? Because as you just laid out, it's clear that the men's health plays a massive role in general health on fertility and pregnancy success too. So, what are some of those warning signs that people typically don't see ahead of time? I'd love to just hear a little bit about that.
That's kind of it. That's a hard one on the male side, as
Yeah.
far as warning signs go. I mean, we can definitely think about like overall health and think about symptoms around like low testosterone, which would be fatigue, largely anyways. Low libido would definitely be an early warning sign to check in on what's going on with overall health as well as fertility for sure. I would say if you have started trying to conceive, if you have not gotten pregnant in the first 4 months, it's a good time point to check in, like get a semen analysis if you haven't gotten one before. And that 4 month time frame might sound like premature to a lot of people because the standard guideline is to try for 12 months, try for that 1 year mark. But really, if sperm and egg health are optimal and healthy, we should be conceiving within a 3 to 4 month time period. So if not, it's in my book, never too early to check in and see how we can be better supporting our health and fertility, because it does have such a significant impact on the health of the pregnancy and the health of the baby, which ultimately we should be focusing on for sure. So if it's taking more than 4 months to get pregnant, if there has been a chemical pregnancy, that's another big red flag that you need to check in on sperm health, because again, like that rapid division that happens and that DNA reprogramming that happens once that egg is fertilized is heavily reliant on sperm health as well as egg health and egg quality. And then certainly if there has been miscarriage as well, check on sperm health. That's a really important area not to overlook.
Yeah. I want to emphasize a point you said there, Brooke. I think there was obviously so many good nuggets in there, but one of the biggest shocks for us in what we were learning about this was, I think, this point you said around how much the man's health and sperm health goes far beyond just getting pregnant. And can you speak more to that on the impact that the man's health has on this? So I'm hearing you say pregnancy success, so like decreasing pregnancy loss rates, and also again potentially the health of the child as well. Can you speak to those different areas and how that works?
Certainly, yeah. Yeah. So we're because of how 50% of the DNA that is going to make up that tiny human is coming from the male side. We see a really high risk of pregnancy complications coming from poor sperm health, just as much as we do from poor egg health. But it's almost 50% of risk factors that involve the placenta are traced back to either poor morphology or poor DNA fragment or high DNA fragmentation in the sperm preconception time. So a lot of pregnancy risk factors involve the placenta. So when we're thinking about preeclampsia and gestational diabetes, that's involving the placenta and definitely can be traced back to sperm health in really big ways. So the health of the overall pregnancy is certainly impacted by what's happening with that placenta because how it is involved in supporting the development of baby and the whole pregnancy. Um, and even before that placenta is developed, we see the impact that poor sperm parameters has on just ability to carry to term, just because of how that DNA programming happens really, really quickly. And if there are errors in sperm, good quality eggs can overcome a certain amount of errors that occur, but if there is a significant amount of damage or poor sperm health, it's definitely going to greatly increase the chance of loss in that first trimester time for sure. And then as far as the lifelong health of the tiny human goes, like sperm is actually absolutely playing a role there too. We see increased childhood chronic disease that can actually be traced back to sperm health, specifically higher rates of obesity, higher rates of cancer are actually linked back to sperm health too.
Yeah. This is not talked about. And I think it's fascinating, and I think it's great to see that there is more research going into this, but thank you for sharing that. Um, I want to bring up a trend here. I think I've seen you do this on socials. I love this trend in general across a lot of different areas, and it's what I would tell you about a certain topic if I didn't care about hurting your feelings. We applied this to this conversation here, and I asked, what would you want to share with men looking to have a kid in the next year if you weren't afraid to hurt their feelings? What would you share in that context?
Would honestly be that your sperm analysis is not normal. I'm sorry.
Mm.
Like I've chatted with a lot of men that are like really proud of that sperm analysis, and then I see the sperm analysis and I'm like, dude, it's not even close to normal. I mean, yes, it's falling within the WHO parameters that have been set, which I have a lot of thoughts around, but this would absolutely have been considered infertile 50 years ago.
Let's dive into that because I think that's a huge point of conversation here. And I know you've been very outspoken about this. Can you share more just on what is considered normal, what the implications are, how that's changed over time?
Yes, yes. So the World Health Organization, WHO, has set these sperm parameters, and they have actually changed about 4 times since 1980. So the most recent change has been in 2010, and it actually represents the lowest fifth percentile of the population that was studied. Basically, the couples that were able to get pregnant within 12 months of trying, they used the lowest fifth percentile of that population. So This essentially means that 95% of the study participants had better sperm parameters than what the official guidelines ended up being, that the WHO used to identify what normal sperm parameters are. So basically what this means is that many men that would have been flagged for additional support are actually now considered normal. And it's based on getting pregnant. It's not based on staying pregnant or any like the health of the pregnancy or the lifelong health of that tiny human. It's literally just getting pregnant. So they use that very, very lowest fifth percentile to then put these parameters out and say like, okay, well, if you have 15 million sperm, it's considered normal. Whereas 50 years ago, that would have been considered infertile. And
Yeah.
then when we're looking at like morphology, for instance, they're like, well, okay, if it's at least 4%, that's normal. And again, like that would have been infertile 50 years ago. The standards that they used, there's a lot of issues there. Getting pregnant is obviously a big goal, but it is not the goal, right? Healthy baby should always be the ultimate goal there. And then time to conception there at 12 months is definitely something we want to talk about too, as far as not being optimal either.
So Brooke, I'm hearing you saying that this has shifted a lot over the last 30 to 50 years in terms of what the guidelines were then and what we were thinking about from a normal capacity to what it is now. So, I think a lot of people don't know, but let's say that you're actually going in and getting your sperm tested and you're getting those results and you're told that it's normal. Should you be asking additional questions to your doctor after that, and what should they be sharing, or what is being missed in that? Because it seems like it's not painting the full picture.
It's certainly not painting the full picture for sure. I would ask, if you're being told that your semen analysis is normal, and you are working with a provider, I would ask them if there are any areas for improvement, even though it's normal. Is there anything that I can do to, decrease time to conception or support, the healthy baby outcome? I mean, to be honest, there's probably a good chance that they'll tell you there's nothing you can do or there's no need to worry about it. Unfortunately, I mean, there are awesome providers out there that might give you some different feedback, but I would start there and then I would look at the actual numbers. And even though, there might not be any parameters that are flagged, think about what would be actually more optimal, which would be at least 48 million sperm per milliliter is how that reads out. Motility should be at least 63% or higher. Ideally, we want morphology that's over 10%, really over 12%. And then DNA fragmentation. And DNA fragmentation is not a standard marker to look at, but I strongly recommend doing a test where either requesting it through your provider or doing a home test option. There are some really great home test options out there that are doing DNA fragmentation quite reliably. But you want that DNA fragmentation to be below 30%. And you can have normal count, normal motility, normal morphology, but high DNA fragmentation. So if you are, somebody who or within a couple that has been experiencing recurrent loss or long time to conception, I strongly, strongly recommend getting that DNA fragmentation looked at as well. It can be changed, it absolutely can be changed, but knowing it's there can be really a helpful driver in being able to create that change.
Yeah. Yeah. This is very fascinating because I think this is just a lot of even the terminology that a lot of people don't even know to look for. Can you define DNA fragmentation for us and for people maybe who haven't heard this terminology before?
Yes. Yes. So it's the literal DNA inside the sperm that is put together, should be put together in each and every sperm. And when it's fragmented, it's literally broken. So if there's places of breakage or fragmentation throughout that DNA, it's going to be really hard for conception to be successful, or that continued division and development of the embryo to be continued to develop for a healthy pregnancy. So a high amount of DNA fragmentation is something you want to avoid. And it's definitely something that can be changed in really big ways. I've seen DNA fragmentation go from 90 percentile all the way down to below 30 percentile with nutrition and lifestyle changes, no medications, no, reproductive technology or anything like that. And it is important um, to know that with reproductive technology, I'm talking like IUI, where they are likely washing the sperm, or IVF, where they're like fertilizing the egg in a petri dish. Those supports can be fantastic, but it's not going to change the quality of your sperm. So even if you are looking at using those tools, or if you have been using those tools and you're not seeing success, look at DNA fragmentation. It is something that you absolutely have to make those nutrition and lifestyle changes in order to see change. Otherwise, the success rates are going to continue to be low.
I think that's such an interesting point, because obviously going through IVF is such an investment, either financially or even just emotionally as well, for a couple. And to think about what the man can be doing to prepare his sperm as well for that is so critical. And I think a conversation that we aren't necessarily talking about enough, because obviously you're putting so much into this. And I think that's really great to know as well. I want to move on to nutrition in a second here and how we can truly improve on these things. And before we even go there, I'm shocked by the stats you're sharing, even on what the WHO has said is normal and so on. And all of that is truly just because I think we're seeing a lot of decreasing rates of just overall sperm health. I'm curious, obviously you are so deep in this research and you are working with individuals that are experiencing this day in, day out. What are you seeing as an overall trend around sperm health? And I'd even go as far as say, what do you think is causing this in general, that we're seeing such alarming stats?
They are alarming. It's mind-boggling to me. I have honestly never seen a optimal sperm analysis initially when I start working with couples. And obviously the population I'm working with, like they are having challenges in getting pregnant and carrying to term. So we have to keep that in mind. But this is a huge, huge problem. And we know with where the WHO has set the guidelines that it's much, much bigger than what I'm seeing alone. And in the research and everything, it's a really, really big problem. Morphology is a really, really big parameter that I see as a trend of being very low, typically below 4% or right at 4%. Most of the time, men are told like, well, it doesn't matter, or, there's nothing you can do to change that parameter, which is so untrue. So what morphology is, it's this shape of the sperm, or a large part of it is the shape of the sperm. So we have to think about how sperm is being put together and what kind of exposures are changing how that sperm is being put together. And that process takes around 3 months. But how the male is living and his environment and exposures as far as things like nutrition and toxins play a really, really big role in what his body is able to do in order to kind of put the building blocks together and protect that sperm from damage. And that's true for just the number of sperm that's being created. So count and motility, how it's swimming is going to be impacted by that whole process too. But I would say toxins are absolutely playing a role, and just overall Stress. So not only like external stressors like relationship stress, work life stress, all those definitely play a role. I would say internal, like more metabolic stressors are definitely playing a big role, which the toxin conversation definitely comes into play there because having this high load of toxins is going to be more of a burden and your body's going to require more energy and resources to eliminate those toxins, which leads to stress around, just everyday functions, let alone the extra energy that's needed to support reproduction, like building that sperm, right? It's going to lose out on that. And all of those things definitely lend to more damage along the way too. So even if there's a lot of resources coming in, if there isn't a lot of protection happening, which can be things like antioxidants in the diet or, rest and recovery through sleep. There's a lot of big processes that happen to help protect sperm health through our sleep too. We're going to see lower poor sperm quality from all of that.
Sleep is a big discussion in our house, huh, Luke? It's one
Yeah.
that we need to prioritize more. And we have certainly heard from people far smarter than us how important sleep is. I think that's a great one. I also think the delineation around the different types of stress is so important because truly when I hear speaking about stress, I just think about like life impact on like whether it's work stress, relationship stress, whatever it might be. But I think that's a really good point to hone in on. Let's move on to nutrition because what I love about this too, Brooke, obviously this is your bread and butter, is there's actionable steps people can take as they're hearing a lot of these alarming stats that we just walked through. So I would love to talk about, just nutrition in general. And maybe to start with, what do you say to people who are skeptical of the role that nutrition plays in fertility?
To think about what ingredients are necessary for literally building sperm. And if we do take those steps back and think about just biology and what our cells need to create new cells and literally build proteins and DNA and on and so forth. It really comes down to nutrients and proteins and fatty acids. Where do we get those things? We get them from nutrition. And of course, there's supplements that play a really good positive role too for helping fill in the gaps. But what we're eating has to be the foundation of all of it. It's how our cells create energy and build new cells, as I mentioned. And so, if we're not actually providing our body with the resources that they need to appropriately build sperm and protect sperm, there's going to be errors every step of the way.
I think that's obviously so true. And I think that's such a good way to put this. So for male fertility specifically, I'd be curious, what are the two biggest nutritional shifts that you've seen to improve male fertility?
Focusing on quality protein intake, making sure that the sources are good and you're getting enough of it. And this was really primarily animal protein just because of the nutrients that we're going to be getting from that protein. And then antioxidants in the diet are huge too, as the second one. So color is a good way to think about it. In the diet, our deep, rich, colorful produce is going to be helpful in so many ways. And I briefly mentioned that antioxidants are a really big way that we actually protect sperm from damage. And when I say damage, there's just normal metabolic processes that lend to higher oxidative stress and oxidative damage that decrease motility and change morphology, for instance. But the stressors, like internal stressors, can lend to more of that too. And the antioxidants come in and help decrease the amount of damage that are coming along there. So when I'm thinking about foods, I'm thinking about things like beets and berries and citrus, dark leafy greens, your red, orange Fruits and vegetables have a lot of good, important antioxidants for sperm health too. But color and protein.
I'm laughing because I think Luke, would you say you're incredibly on board with the first one? I think if Luke could only eat protein, he would do that and never touch a leafy green again.
Yeah, I think that's pretty accurate. Brooke, I'm interested to nail down on the first part that you did mention though. So as Cam said, I love animal-based protein, but we're hearing so much and the craze of protein has grown so much. So can you speak a little bit on the first part that you mentioned that I think is really important is that high quality protein, and then also like what's a good rule of thumb in terms of how much of that high quality protein we should be having?
Yeah. Yeah. So, as far as quality goes, like what the animal ate and how it lived impacts the nutrients that you're getting in the meat. And I think this is a kind of a funny thing to talk about because it is very much mirroring how I am encouraging couples to eat, right? What we eat impacts our reproduction and our health. So naturally, when you think of eating an egg, for instance, what the chicken ate and how it lived, if it got sunlight, if it was outside eating bugs and the grass, it's going to impact the nutrients in their eggs too. So
Yeah.
Mother Nature's pretty cool like that. But same for beef and pork and whatever animal protein we're thinking about. If it's dairy, even like thinking about what the animal ate makes a big difference as far as what we are going to be getting to not only the amount of nutrients, but also the types of nutrients, the types of fats. Also, and there's always a lot of questions around like red meat, but when we are focusing on more grass-fed beef, omega-3s, which are anti-inflammatory fats, are much higher than our more inflammatory type fats in a grass-fed beef versus a grain-fed cow. So, yes. And I'm forgetting the second part of that question.
Rule of thumb for the proper amount that people should be aiming for on a daily basis.
Yeah, roughly 1 gram for per pound of body weight is rough. Of course, there can be nuance between or among your activity level.
Yeah.
But start slow too. If you are eating much less protein than that, you don't want to just one day wake up and start eating like 180 grams of protein because that's going to be a little rough on the digestion.
Yeah.
Slowly increase it. Make sure you're chewing your food well, eating slowly, listen to your body. But yes, that's the standard recommendation that I give.
I'm feeling very validated here. I think we can almost end it of I am a slow eater. I try to get a gram of protein per body weight per day. And I love all things grass fed and grass finished. I have been getting more into the omega-3 high nutrient foods as well, a lot more lately. So this is great.
Kudos to you.
Yeah,
Kudos.
this is great.
Yeah. All right. I would actually love to do a rapid fire section here. And I think you've actually touched on a lot of these already, but I'm just going to go through a few different food categories. And I would love to get then essentially a good or bad, maybe not as good. We don't need to say bad if it's not fully bad. Just overall sentiment on these. So first, red meat,
Good.
good. Dairy,
Nuanced. Quality matters there big time.
okay. Let's come back to that one. Sugar.
It depends where it comes from. Yeah.
Depends. Sure. Okay. So actually, I'm curious on sugar. When you say depends where it comes from, what do you mean there?
Yeah, so limiting added sugar is always good. Even if we're talking about things like honey and monk fruit, and all of those are still going to be, your added sugar. But, if we're talking about sugars that are in like fruits and starchy veggies, like those are great. Those are alongside a lot of your fiber, a lot of like nutrients also. So, we want carbohydrates. Carbohydrates are, maybe I'm getting too technical here, but they're technically sugar, right? And we
Yeah.
don't want to cut those out. But just limiting your added sugar and trying to like really limit your refined sugars, which like your white table sugar, pastry baked goods, like those types of things that are going to be not as nutrient dense.
Yep. Fair enough. Fish and omega-3s.
Great.
Gluten.
Also nuanced. The source, I would say, makes a big difference. Like, are refined versus like, are we like more stone ground, whole wheat, whole grain? I don't think gluten is inherently bad. I think it's the processing and how it's grown and makes a big difference.
Okay. And then a vegan diet.
No. Bad.
So I appreciate the strong response, because I am curious, if someone has been vegan for the majority of their life and now they're looking to have a child, would you say that it's actually worth changing their diet now, even if it's a disruption to their standard system?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And there's definitely enough both research and just clinical practice experience to show that, the outcomes from being vegan and how it impacts not only like time to conception, but health of pregnancy and health of that baby is really big. And a vegan diet is one that, we actually have evidence around saying that if the male is deficient in certain nutrients, pre-conception time, it's irreversible. The impact on the baby is going to be irreversible. And the same goes for the female. Wow. If they are vegan during pregnancy and they have been deficient in B12, there's actually irreversible development outcomes that occur in baby from that. So yeah, it's a big no for me.
And back to dairy quickly as well. So what is the nuance there, good versus bad?
Yeah, so the quality definitely makes a difference in like the nutrient profile and if it's going to be really strongly beneficial or not, I would say. So there's a big I guess I should say there's a spectrum of tolerance to dairy too. So if you don't tolerate it, like don't force it, but also like if you're able to have it, for men specifically, low fat dairy, organic grass-fed low fat dairy can be really beneficial for a lot of the nutrients that we're getting in there. Like it can be a good protein source. It can be a good source of iodine, especially if seafood intake is low, which is really important for overall like thyroid health, which impacts sperm health and development in a lot of ways too. Vitamin D intake from that can also be beneficial.
I knew we weren't going to be able to fully rapid fire this. There's too much nuance here.
It's too
That's
much
okay.
nuance.
We're still good. I heard you mention earlier just around supplementation. Of course, we love this conversation because this is the precipice of ties, is that I think we've seen that most diets have nutrient gaps. So I'm curious, just first, like how you've seen the role of supplementation around filling some of those gaps and specifically around fertility. And then I'll ask a second one after that around ties.
Yes. So supplements are definitely part of every protocol that I provide to my male clients. I think it's impossible, I will say, to fully meet all of your nutrient needs in our modern day world. Not only because our lives are busy and it's, I never push people to be perfect in their eating habits, because we should also enjoy, eating out and the other aspects of eating are like community and culture and all of these things too, even though we can make a lot of really good positive changes in our diet. And that should absolutely be the foundation. There's inherently going to be gaps. We can take it a step further and talk about growing practices and how depleted our soil is. And, foods are just not as nutrient dense as they once were either. So it is really impossible to get like all of those needs met, especially with the exposures on the other side, which can be very depleting of certain nutrients too. Exposures I'm meaning are like the toxin piece or the internal stressor piece that take up a lot of nutrients. So supplements are definitely a really helpful um, tool to use to fill in the gaps in those areas for sure.
And then with respect to ties, of course, you were fundamental in the ingredients going into this. We have our carnitine, selenium, vitamin C, methylated folate, zinc, and our beautiful CoQ10 or coenzyme Q10. I'd be curious, just in general, like your perspective on impact on sperm health there, any that you want to highlight, and just the value that that brings.
Yeah, so a really fantastic antioxidant blend. Most of them are antioxidants, which play a really important role in protecting that sperm, but also building the sperm too. So, in a world of just negative exposures, I'll put it that way. Those antioxidants are definitely going to be like little superheroes in coming in and protecting sperm from damage and just supporting what's happening with the count and the motility and morphology. If we're looking at selenium, technically acts a lot like an antioxidant too, but it's an important nutrient for just how we're building sperm to um, just how like the thyroid is being supported, which plays a really big role in the whole spermatogenesis or building of the sperm too. Or carnitines are going to be really important for testosterone health as well, and so those. Supporting sperm from that angle, which is really important and helpful. And then your carnitines and CoQ10 are also going to be really important for mitochondrial health, so cellular health and how that energy is being created. And fertility is just a extremely energy intensive process. So getting all the help we can from a little bit of CoQ10 and carnitines is really going to make a positive difference as a whole. So yeah, it's really a great antioxidant blend overall. And then I guess the one that wouldn't be an antioxidant would be your folate. And the form of folate makes a big difference. So that methylated form is going to be ideal for just how our body is able to use that in the DNA programming and the building of that sperm as a whole.
I wanna switch gears for a second here, Brooke, and dive into lifestyle because there's so much dialogue that's online now around a lot of these different things that we'll go through. So I'd love to kind of set the record straight. We have a list of some lifestyle elements here that we'd love to get your honest feedback on, kind of similar to what we did on the nutrition side of good, bad, maybe a few lines around them. Um, so the first one I want to start off with is saunas.
Bad, unfortunately.
Yeah. Can you speak to that one a little bit? Because I think that'll surprise a ton of people, and it really surprised me.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, saunas have so many good health benefits, but when we're talking about sperm, the male body is designed to keep sperm outside the body to keep them cool largely. And so when we're heating up that body temperature and that scrotal temperature, it causes a lot of damage, unfortunately. Saunas are a big no during the preconception time period.
What about, I don't know if you were about to go here, Luke. I have seen some people speak on putting an ice pack um, on during sauning to make sure that like that area stays cool. What is your perspective on this? Is this the hack that allows men to still sauna, or is that just putting a Band-Aid on a wound or whatever?
Yeah, we don't have a ton of like actual data around that, but I would say no, because your internal body temperature is still heating up. So even though you have this cooling object like right on top of the area, like you're still really overheating as a whole. So it's still going to create damage at some level. I mean, if you want to do a personal experiment with that, do a semen analysis, and then wait 3 months while you sauna and see what happens. But I would say just to avoid it preconception time.
What about the other end of that contrast therapy with cold plunges? What would you recommend there?
So there's a fair amount of nuance there too, as far as like temperature of the cold plunge, time that you're in it. We actually do see a negative impact from it being too extreme, but that can actually depend on the overall health of the male and where that fertility is starting to. So it's hard for me to say like absolutely not or yes, it's fantastic because of those factors that seem to be coming into play. I actually have a deep dive podcast on cold plunging for men and women on my my podcast if you want to learn more about that there's a fair amount of nuance.
We'll have to put the link. We'll put the link. Yeah, we'll put the link to that. What about caffeine?
Dose matters with caffeine. We can definitely overdo it. Too much caffeine can be negative as it can be like really increasing the cortisol, like increasing that internal stress environment that we don't want to be doing. But if we're talking about a cup of black coffee in the morning, that's typically totally fine.
Okay. And what about alcohol?
Limit. Well, if DNA fragmentation is high, I recommend eliminating alcohol because that's definitely going to be a negative offender. If DNA fragmentation is low and you're really supporting overall like stress state and nourishment and sleep quality, a drink or two a week supported by that can be okay.
Okay. And two more here. I'd love to get your opinion on marijuana.
No.
No.
I don't recommend any THC products.
Yeah. It makes sense. What about a really popular one that I'm sure you've gotten a ton of questions on, but what about Zen?
Do not recommend it. So even though it's not tobacco, the nicotine is a negative, definitely a big negative one for sperm.
Okay. And of all of those that we just listed, is there any that you would put at like the top of being the most cautious of if you're really focused on your fertility journey or preparing for that fertility journey in general?
That's a tough one. I mean, because to be honest, like the dose of all of them makes a difference for sure. But I would say that even a small amount of marijuana or THC is definitely impacting negative sperm parameters. And I see that in practice too. Apparently there's new, I don't know, I learned these things from my clients, but there's new like beverages with like small amounts of THC in them. And I had a client recently that was drinking those, but had stopped all other like THC use. And it wasn't until he stopped drinking those beverages that we actually saw a full turnaround of the DNA fragmentation piece. So that's a pretty direct correlation because he was doing everything else as far as supporting fertility goes. So I'd say that's a pretty strong offender.
That's incredibly interesting. Thank you. I think I would be remiss if we didn't flag that a lot of this can probably get very overwhelming. I will say, like, even as Luke and I have personally just started to look into the things that we need to cut, things we need to add, it becomes a lot. And obviously this is, for a lot of people, one of the most important parts of your life. So it is of course worth it. But I'd be curious how you speak to the couples that you work with on kind of managing that stress and how this can get quite overwhelming, thinking of the lifestyle and food and just other changes in general.
Certainly. I would remind yourself that it's not about perfection. You don't have to do every single thing perfectly to see improvements in sperm health. And thinking about what's realistic for you guys as a couple as you go through the journey is important. what is not only realistic right now, but what is going to be sustainable, because it's what you can sustain that is going to really have the biggest impact. If you're focusing on nutrition changes, for instance, step into it slowly, like focus on one meal at a time. Maybe it's breakfast that you're maybe not even eating, and getting a high protein breakfast in there and just focusing on that for a couple of weeks alone without any other
Yeah.
changes, it's going to make a significant impact. And then as far as like product swaps go, like as you run out of something, replace it. It doesn't have to be a full overhaul all at one time, but it's these little things that are end up becoming habits, and really sustainable ones that you then can hopefully continue on and pass on to your healthy tiny humans that you'll end up having. It just becomes a way of life. But the minute that it becomes like overwhelming and too stressful and too much, it can start actually having a negative impact on your health and fertility, because of how stress impacts fertility. So you have to hit the pause button, take a step back, like have honest conversations with each other about what is going to work and what is not. And, if there's areas that are just not realistic and sustainable for you, focus on different ones. That's completely okay. It's still going to be making a positive difference.
I think that's so important, especially in today's society where everything is getting measured, everything is trying to get optimized, and we have so much information that's constantly flooding our feeds and our minds at all points in time. And so I know, even speaking from personal experience, you see someone that you admire or someone that you really trust on all things health, and they give you 8 things that you should be doing, and you try to implement them tomorrow, and then you end up not actually implementing all of them and not getting that day done. And then all of a sudden you have this stress and guilt that your lifestyle wasn't actually ready to take those on, versus implementing them one by one and starting to make that an actual habit that sticks. So I'm definitely going to lean into that. And there's so many good tidbits that we went through today. But I guess before we go, Brooke, I'd love then, on that same line of thought, to think about what is like one small change that a man could make tomorrow that would have an outsized impact, and something that they can start to implement, and hopefully then stick with.
Yeah, yes. So sleep quality is such a big overarching foundation, that it has to be focused on. It has to be focused on. So as far as the change, maybe it's getting to bed 30 minutes earlier, for instance, to get at least that 7 hours of sleep. Or maybe it is, getting off of your screen 30 minutes to an hour before, because of the positive impact that has on our hormone shifts in order to support that quality of sleep. Or it could even be that you're getting morning sunlight, because that also has a really positive impact on your nighttime sleep quality, because our circadian rhythm works that way. And light exposure is a really big role, or plays a really big role in sleep quality, whether it's before bed or when you're waking up. Those things are some really important things. But thinking about your sleep routine, your sleep hygiene, making sleep more of a job, because it is important. It's that important for fertility and longevity too.
That's a big one. Yeah. There we go, Luke.
It's hard for to startup founders, right? It's the ideal one that you don't want to think about at the moment, but you're so right. It's so important for overall longevity, and honestly how we optimize throughout our daily lives, and reducing our stress that is constantly being bombarded in our daily lives. So that's really great.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Brooke. Before we even close out here, where can people find you if they want to dig into more of your amazing work? Would love to just give that shout out there.
Yeah, my biggest platform is Instagram, the .fertility.dietitian. You can find me there. You can look me up on my website. It's the fertilitydietitian.health also, and um, navigate to any of my programs or my digital store from there.
Amazing. We'll put that in the link. Well, thank you, Brooke. This has been our Ties Pod. We're so thankful for you coming on, and we'll make sure that we link everything for everybody to follow along and the amazing work you do. So thank you.
Thank you so much for having me.